During a quiet night shift, Melissa, a dedicated nurse, surprises her colleague Lucia by emerging smiling from the bathroom. Her palpable and radiant happiness soon becomes the center of a revealing conversation. Melissa is pregnant. This news, full of hope and promises of new beginnings, quickly gives way to a mix of joy and concerns. Despite sharing the initial excitement, Lucia cannot help but express her apprehension about Marcelo, the father of the future baby, whose family has a complicated reputation and instability that could affect everyone involved. From there, the story unfolds into a series of emotional twists and confrontations that challenge Melissa's expectations and stability. From Marcelo's shocking and disheartening reaction to betrayal and abandonment, Melissa finds herself navigating the turbulent waters of life, testing her strength and resilience. As she faces rejections and unexpected dismissal, and even isolation after being expelled from her own home, Melissa must seek refuge and comfort in her friend Lucia and, eventually, an unexpected reconciliation with her own mother. This exciting tale not only explores the depths of human despair, but also celebrates the relentless pursuit of acceptance, belonging, and the rediscovery of lost family ties. Melissa's story, marked by adversity, brings to light the human capacity to overcome and find light even in the darkest moments. If you are looking for a journey that mixes the rawness of human emotions with the beauty of resilience and renewal, join us in this touching narrative, which promises to leave a lasting mark on your heart. Melissa was on her night shift when she emerged from the bathroom smiling, feeling a happiness she hadn't experienced in a long time. The sparkle in her eyes was unmistakable and did not go unnoticed by her coworker, Lucia. "What happened?" Lucia asked, intrigued by the smile on Melissa's face. "It's been a while since I've seen you so happy." Melissa bit her lower lip, holding back her excitement, but she couldn't contain herself for long. "I'm pregnant," she announced, her eyes shining with joy. Lucia's eyes widened, and without a second thought, she hugged Melissa tightly. "Congratulations! I'm so happy for you, Melissa," Lucia exclaimed, feeling her friend's happiness as if it were her own. "Thank you, Lucia." Melissa thanked her, returning the hug. "I'm so excited. I've already started making plans for the baby. Will it be a boy or a girl? And the name? There's so much to think about. And Marcelo will be so happy, he's always wanted to be a father." Lucia, who had been sharing her friend's euphoria until then, suddenly became serious. She looked at Melissa with an expression that mixed concern and caution. "Melissa, have you told Marcelo yet?" she asked, trying not to sound pessimistic but unable to hide her apprehension. Melissa shook her head, still smiling. "No, not yet, but I know he'll love being a father, he loves children." Lucia sighed, hesitating before continuing. "I hope so, but, Melissa, you know Marcelo is very wealthy, and that's great for the baby's future. However, you've told me before that he's not a very stable person mentally." Lucia bit her lip, thinking about the right words to use. "I met his family some time ago, and they're not exactly easy to deal with. I have some reservations about them." Melissa frowned, but her expression remained positive. "I know they can be complicated, but I think a baby can change people, you know," she said, trying to convince her friend and perhaps herself. "I'm sure everything will be all right." Lucia nodded slowly, not wanting to spoil her friend's moment but still worried. "I really hope you're right, Melissa. I just want you to be prepared, you know?" Lucia's shift ended, and Melissa finally went to Marcelo's house. When she arrived, everything was quiet, he was still asleep. Melissa decided not to wake him. Instead, she lay down next to him, imagining how he would react to the news. She spent the morning envisioning the future, the house filled with the laughter of children. Later, when Marcelo woke up, he was excited. "I have a surprise for us," he said, smiling. "We're going on a trip this weekend. I rented a beach house, it's going to be great, just the two of us relaxing. Melissa smiled, feeling a wave of relief. Maybe this was the perfect time to tell him. She decided not to ruin his surprise, and started packing their things while they were in the car. Marcelo stopped to get gas. The feeling of euphoria and happiness still overwhelmed Melissa, and she decided that was the moment. Marcelo, I have something amazing to tell you, she began, her voice laden with emotion. I'm pregnant. Marcelo's smile disappeared immediately, his eyes lost their sparkle, and he turned his face, staring at the steering wheel. Melissa felt the atmosphere in the car change drastically. I don't want to be a father, Melissa, his voice came out cold and distant. Not now. I still want to enjoy life, I don't want to be tied down to a child. Melissa felt her heart sink, she had not expected this reaction, especially after all his excitement about the trip. But Marcelo, I thought. She tried to argue, her voice starting to break. Thought what? He interrupted, now irritated. That I would want this? Who knows if this child is mine? Melissa felt a shock go through her body. The insult hit her like a slap, she had never given him a reason to doubt her fidelity. How can you say that? Melissa shouted, tears starting to roll down her face. Of course, it's your child. Marcelo snorted, opened the car door, and stepped out, slamming the door with force. I need to be alone, he said, without looking at her. The trip is over. I can't deal with this now. He got back into the car, started the engine, and without saying another word, drove off, leaving Melissa alone at the gas station, feeling helpless. Melissa started to cry, she had never felt so lost and alone. After a few minutes, she composed herself enough to pick up the phone and call Lucia. Lucia, it's Melissa, she said, her voice trembling. I know it's a hassle, but I have nowhere else to go. Can I come to your house? Lucia did not hesitate. Of course, Melissa, come on. You can stay as long as you need. When Melissa arrived at Lucia's house, she could barely stand. Lucia hugged her tightly, feeling her friend's pain. It's going to be okay, Melissa, Lucia said gently. We're in this together. Melissa nodded, trying to believe her friend's words, but fear and uncertainty still haunted her heart. Melissa tried to call Marcelo numerous times over the following days, but he did not answer her calls. Each ring that went unanswered increased the feeling of powerlessness and frustration inside her. She knew she needed to talk to him, sort everything out, understand what was really happening. Determined, Melissa returned to Marcelo's house, but when she tried to open the front door, she realized that her keys no longer worked. Panic took hold of her, she tried again with more force, but the lock seemed to have been changed. With no other choice, Melissa returned to Lucia's house, where she was greeted with a worried look. And then Lucia asked, seeing her friend's dejected state. He changed the locks, my keys don't open the door anymore, Melissa replied, her voice laden with fatigue and disbelief. Lucia sighed, placing a comforting hand on Melissa's shoulder. Come on, let's try calling him again. Melissa nodded and picked up her phone, tried once more, and this time, to her surprise, Marcelo answered. What do you want, Melissa? Marcelo's voice was cold, devoid of any emotion. Marcelo, what's going on? Why did you change the locks? Melissa asked, trying to stay calm. I don't want anything to do with you anymore. Our relationship is over, Marcelo said, dry and direct. And I don't want you in my house. What about the baby? Melissa asked, her voice trembling. I don't want that child, Marcelo replied, cutting off any hope Melissa might still have had. Melissa felt a knot in her throat, but this time she didn't cry. Instead, she felt a growing anger. "Marcelo, you're a coward," she said, her voice firm, without hesitation. "I don't deserve this." He hung up without responding. Melissa stared at the phone, her chest heaving rapidly with anger. Lucia, who had heard the entire conversation, approached. "I'm sorry, Melissa. He doesn't deserve you, nor this baby," Lucia said, hugging her friend. Melissa took a deep breath, trying to recompose herself. She was tired of feeling weak, of depending on Marcelo's crumbs of attention. "I will get over this, Lucia," Melissa said, her tone filled with renewed determination. A few days passed, and one morning, Lucia heard a firm knock at the door. When she opened it, she found a middle-aged woman with perfectly styled gray hair and a serious expression. It was Fatima, Marcelo's mother. "Good morning," the woman said, without even forcing a smile. "I want to talk to Melissa." Lucia hesitated, but before she could respond, Melissa appeared behind her, her face hardened upon recognizing the visitor. "What do you want, Fatima?" Melissa asked, crossing her arms. Fatima entered without being invited, with an arrogant posture. "I came to tell you to stop calling my son," Fatima began bluntly. "I was the one who advised him to kick you out of the house. We have no room for a woman like you bringing shame to our family." Melissa felt her face burn with indignation. "Shame?" she repeated, incredulous. "I never cheated on Marcelo." Fatima snorted, crossing her arms with disdain. "It's a shame for my son that his girlfriend is having a child with another man," she said with cutting coldness. "And now he's going to be known as the man whose girlfriend cheated on him. You think I'm going to allow him to be ridiculed in that way?" Melissa stepped forward, without hesitation. "I never cheated on Marcelo," she shouted, "and this baby is his." Fatima shook her head with disdain. "It doesn't matter. I've said what I came to say. Stop calling my son. You're not welcome in our family." Melissa, overcome with anger, pointed to the door. "Get out of here now," she ordered. Fatima gave one last look of disdain before leaving, and Melissa slammed the door shut, feeling adrenaline coursing through her body. She turned to Lucia, her eyes filled with tears of frustration. "I'm sorry, Lucia," Melissa said, her voice breaking from all the trouble. Lucia pulled her into a hug. "You don't have to apologize," Lucia replied. "We'll get through this together." A few days later, the two friends were back at the hospital, ready for a normal day at work. However, they had barely started when Melissa was called by the Human Resources Department. She exchanged a worried look with Lucia before going. When she arrived, she was greeted by one of the directors, who had a solemn expression. "Melissa, I'm sorry to inform you, but we need to cut staff, and unfortunately, you're one of the ones being laid off." Melissa was shocked. "Am I the only one being laid off?" she asked, feeling her stomach churn. "Yes, unfortunately," the director replied, averting his gaze. Later, back on shift, Lucia found her, Melissa's face still marked by surprise and pain. "Melissa, I heard what happened," Lucia said, biting her lip. "I found out that Fatima, being rich and influential, pressured the hospital's management to have you fired." Melissa felt the tears return. But this time, she couldn't hold them back. She felt as if the ground had crumbled beneath her feet. "I don't know what to do, Lucia," she cried, her hands covering her face. "It seems like there's no hope left. They're destroying my life, one piece at a time." Lucia hugged her, holding her tight. "It's going to be okay, Melissa. I promise. We'll find a way. You're not alone." But at that moment, Melissa felt more lost than ever, unsure how or where she would find the strength to move forward. Days passed, and Melissa was still at Lucia's house. Although Lucia was an amazing friend and always assured her that she could stay as long as she needed, Melissa couldn't shake the feeling of being a burden. Every time they crossed paths in the kitchen or living room, Melissa felt a weight on her heart. Lucia was generous, but Melissa knew this wasn't a permanent solution. One evening, while the two were sitting at the dinner table, Melissa decided it was time to have a serious conversation. "Lucia, I've been thinking," Melissa started, her voice hesitant. "I think it's time for me to leave." Lucia stopped her fork midway to her mouth, her face filled with concern. "Leave for where?" she asked, dropping the fork and focusing all her attention on her friend. Melissa sighed, toying with her food with little interest. "I'm going back to my mother's house," she replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "She lives in the neighboring town, in the rural area." Lucia furrowed her brow. She knew that Melissa and her mother, Marta, had a complicated relationship. "Have you talked to her? Does she know you're coming?" Lucia questioned, trying to hide the apprehension in her voice. Melissa shook her head. "No, I haven't spoken to her in years, but I think it's the best option now. I need a place where I can recover and start over. And you've done so much for me, I don't want to be a burden." Lucia stood up and went to Melissa, pulling her into a tight hug. "You'll never be a burden," Lucia said, her eyes filled with empathy. "But I understand if you think it's for the best. I support you. Just know that my house will always be open to you." Melissa smiled, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. She knew it was the right decision, but it was still painful to leave behind the unconditional support of her friend. The next day, Melissa bought a bus ticket to the neighboring town. She didn't notify her mother that she was coming. Something inside her told her it was better to show up unannounced. As the bus started to move, she looked out the window, watching the city she was leaving behind. A mix of anxiety and hope filled her heart. After a few hours, the bus arrived at the small rural town where Marta, her mother, lived. Melissa got off with her suitcase and walked down the dirt roads to her mother's house. When she finally arrived, she paused for a moment in front of the door, took a deep breath, and rang the doorbell. The door opened, revealing Marta. Seeing her daughter, Marta's eyes widened, but a warm smile quickly appeared on her face. "Melissa!" Marta exclaimed, pulling her daughter into an unexpectedly affectionate hug. "My God, it's been so long!" Melissa, surprised by the reception, hugged her mother back. She couldn't remember the last time she had seen Marta so happy. "Hi, Mom," Melissa responded, still trying to process the change in attitude. They entered and sat down in the small living room. Melissa looked around, noticing that the house seemed more organized and welcoming than she remembered. There was a lightness in the atmosphere that hadn't been there before. Marta served some tea and looked at Melissa with curiosity. "What brings you here, dear?" she asked, her voice gentle. Melissa took a deep breath and began to recount what had happened to her in the past few weeks: the breakup with Marcelo, the pregnancy, the forced dismissal, and a feeling of helplessness. Marta listened attentively, her face alternating between sadness and understanding. "You can stay here, Melissa," Marta said, finally taking her daughter's hand. "This house is yours too." Melissa felt a lump in her throat. This was the first time her mother had shown so much affection and support. After a moment of silence, Marta looked into her daughter's eyes with a sincere glint of regret. "I'm sorry, Melissa, for everything that happened in the past," Marta said, her voice laden with emotion. "Back then, I was blind with passion. I didn't realize how complicated the men I dated were. I know you suffered a lot because of that." Melissa squeezed her mother's hand, feeling a connection she thought she had lost forever. "I understand now, Mom," Melissa replied. "After everything I went through with Marcelo, I think I understand a little better what it's like to be stuck with someone complicated. The two sat in silence for a moment, absorbing what they had just shared. Finally, Marta smiled and stood up. "Let's fix up your room," she said, excited. "You'll see, it's going to be good to have you around." Melissa smiled and followed her mother. There was something comforting about the idea of starting anew, even in a place she had never thought to return to. The next day, Melissa woke up early and asked her mother where she could work as a nurse in town. "Well, there are a few places that might be hiring," Marta suggested, "but the easiest place to get a job right now is at the nursing home. They really need someone there." Melissa nodded. "I'll check it out, thank you, Mom." After breakfast, Melissa got ready and went out for her job interviews. She visited several places, the local clinic, the small community hospital, but they all said the same thing: there were no vacancies at the moment. Finally, Melissa arrived at the nursing home. The place was small but well maintained. She talked to the director, a kind woman with gray hair, who seemed genuinely concerned for the residents. "We really need a nurse," the director said, "but we've already interviewed a few other candidates." Melissa felt a tightness in her chest but maintained her composure. "I understand," she said, forcing a smile. "Thank you for the opportunity, anyway." As she left the nursing home, Melissa felt the frustration grow. No place had accepted her, and a feeling of helplessness was returning. She returned to her mother's house with her shoulders slumped, exhausted and disheartened. "How did it go?" Marta asked, although she already knew the answer. "No place accepted me," Melissa replied, feeling tears burn in her eyes. "I don't know what I'm going to do now." Marta hugged her daughter again, stroking her hair. "We'll find a solution, dear, don't worry, I'm here with you." Melissa nodded, finding comfort in her mother's words. She knew she needed to move forward. But the path seemed increasingly difficult. The next day, Melissa woke up early, eager to look for a job. The phone rang, and when she answered, the voice of the nursing home director sounded on the other line. "Good morning, Melissa," said the director in a warm tone. "I'm calling to let you know that an employee quit, and we'd like to offer you the position. You can start tomorrow." Melissa felt a wave of relief and happiness. "Yes, of course, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'll be there tomorrow," she responded with enthusiasm. After hanging up, she took a deep breath. This was what she needed to start rebuilding her life. The next day, she got ready early and headed to work. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. However, at some point, Melissa realized she was lost. The town was small, but the nursing home was in a less busy area, and she didn't know the way well. Anxiety began to take over her. There was little time left before the start of her shift, and Melissa was already beginning to imagine the poor impression she would make by arriving late on her first day. Desperate, she started running through the streets, hoping to recognize some landmark. As she ran, a man on a bicycle passed by her and, noticing her haste, stopped next to her. "Are you okay?" he asked, raising his eyebrows as he watched her with curiosity. Melissa, out of breath, paused for a moment to answer. "I'm late for my first day of work at the nursing home, but I think I got lost," she explained, her voice full of anxiety. The man let out a light laugh and pointed behind him. "I think you're going the wrong way, the nursing home is in that direction," he told her, smiling. "I'm heading there too, want a ride?" Melissa hesitated. Accepting a ride from a stranger was not something she normally did, but then she remembered him. He had been at the nursing home on the day of the interview, she had seen him in passing, and that reassured her a bit. Even so, she decided to be cautious. Discreetly, she took a pepper spray from her purse and put it in her pocket, just for safety. "Okay, I'll take the ride," said Melissa, finally. The man smiled and extended his hand. "I'm Raphael, by the way," he introduced himself while adjusting the bicycle for Melissa to get on. Melissa, she replied, trying not to show her nervousness as she climbed onto the bicycle. During the ride, they chatted a bit, and Raphael explained that he was not an employee of the nursing home, just a volunteer. "I used to come here every day when my mother was staying at the home," he said, his voice softer. "She was there for 2 years, and since I couldn't take care of her at the time, that was the only place I could trust. Now that she's gone, I keep going there. I think it makes me feel closer to her." Melissa felt a pang in her chest hearing his story, but she wasn't quite sure what to say. "It must have been difficult," she commented after a moment of silence. "It was, but it comforts me to know that I did my best, and even after she passed away, I kept going. I met many incredible people there. Now, whenever I can, I stop by, even if it's just to keep the elderly company," Raphael explained with a slight smile. Arriving at the nursing home, Melissa got off the bike and thanked Raphael for the ride. "Thank you so much, Raphael, you saved me today," she said, smiling with relief. "You're welcome," he replied, smiling. "I'm glad you made it on time. Now just knock 'em dead on your first day." Melissa smiled, feeling a bit more relaxed as she entered the home. She was greeted with kind smiles from the other staff and introduced to the residents. She soon found herself engaged in conversations with the elderly, listening to stories of lives filled with happy and sad moments. Each story she heard made her feel more connected to those people, and despite some stories being hard to hear, Melissa felt she was learning something new about life. The elderly were delighted to learn that Melissa was pregnant. With each conversation, someone mentioned the baby she was carrying, and soon everyone at the home began calling the baby little grandchild. Melissa was moved by the affection, feeling welcomed among the community. During breaks, she talked a lot with Raphael, who was always nearby, helping the elderly with small tasks. She discovered that, despite being relatively young, he had been through a lot in life. He was divorced, and Melissa was surprised to hear that. "I got married young," Raphael told her during one of their chats. "It didn't work out, but I learned a lot from the experience. Now, I just want to live more peacefully, and do what I can to help where I can." "It must be hard to deal with so much at once," Melissa commented, watching his calm demeanor. "Life isn't easy, but we try," he replied with a light smile. "And you, how are you handling all this? I mean, your pregnancy, the new job, it's a lot." "It's been difficult, to be honest," she admitted. "But I think I've found a place here where I can feel useful again, and maybe, with time, things will get better." Raphael smiled. "I'm sure you'll do great here," he said, confidently. "The elderly already love you." Melissa smiled, grateful to have found someone with whom she could talk and share her concerns. As the days passed, she felt more integrated into the nursing home, and her conversations with Raphael became a high point of her routines. He was not just pleasant company, but someone who seemed to genuinely care about the people around him. Months quickly passed since Melissa had given birth to her son, Andre. He became the center of her world, the reason for every smile, every effort, and every plan for the future. From the moment she held him in her arms for the first time, she felt that her life had gained new meaning. Marta, her mother, also filled with joy at receiving her first grandchild, spent as much time as possible with him. As Andre grew, Melissa returned to work at the nursing home. The return was warm. All colleagues and residents wanted to know about the baby. "When are you going to bring Andre for us to meet?" they asked repeatedly. "When he grows a little more and has more immunity, I promise I'll bring him for you to meet," Melissa responded with a smile, loving the affection everyone showed. Months passed, and one day, while leaving her house, Melissa ran into Raphael at the nursing home. After a few months without seeing him, when she saw him, she couldn't contain her happiness and hugged him warmly. "Raphael, I've missed you, how are you?" Melissa asked, smiling. Raphael returned the hug with equal affection. "I've missed you too. "How are you? And how's little Andre?" he asked with genuine interest. "We're great, Raphael. He's growing up so fast." "I can hardly believe it," said Melissa, her eyes shining with pride. "That's wonderful. I guess I'll have to buy him a gift, huh?" joked Raphael, laughing. "Oh, you don't have to worry about that, but if you want, you're more than welcome to come over to my house one day and meet Andre." "My mom would love to meet you too," Melissa suggested. Raphael smiled, accepting the invitation without hesitation. "I'd love to come. Let me know when it's a good time." A few days later, Raphael went to Melissa's house, bringing a small gift for the baby. When Melissa introduced him to her mother, Marta warmly welcomed him. "Oh, so you're the famous Raphael that Melissa talks so much about," Marta said with a teasing smile. "Famous? I think that's a bit of an exaggeration," Raphael responded, joking, "but I hope it's for good reasons." Marta laughed, and the three of them sat down while Melissa enjoyed watching the interaction between Raphael and her son. It was clear to her that Raphael already had a huge fondness for Andre, and this filled her heart with joy. Months passed, and gradually, Raphael and Melissa began dating. The connection between them was undeniable. And over time, Raphael became more than just Melissa's boyfriend. He started to raise Andre as if he were his own son. This new dynamic brought a happiness and fulfillment that Melissa hadn't imagined possible. Every day, she felt that her life was finally on track. 10 years passed in the blink of an eye. Melissa and Raphael were still living a perpetual romance, as if the years had not affected the intensity of their relationship. Raphael had become a wonderful father to Andre, who was now a well-mannered, happy, and energetic 10-year-old boy. He loved the presence of his father and the unconditional affection he received. Meanwhile, Marta, Melissa's mother, now older, decided it would be better to live in the nursing home. The decision surprised Melissa, but it made sense. At the home, Marta would have more time with her daughter, in addition to frequent visits from Andre. Moreover, she would have constant company and all the care she needed in an environment she already knew and trusted. On one of those normal workdays at the nursing home, Melissa was informed that she needed to bring medication to the new resident in room 5. When she opened the door, she was met with a surprise she hadn't expected. Fatima, Marcelo's mother and Andre's biological grandmother, was sitting on the bed. As soon as she saw Melissa, Fatima's face contorted with irritation. "What are you doing here?" Fatima asked, her voice full of disdain. "I work here, Fatima. I don't want to talk to you." "I have nothing to do with you," Fatima responded coldly, looking away as if she wanted to end the conversation right there. Melissa, realizing that any attempt at dialogue would be futile at that moment, left the room silently, but her thoughts were racing. She wondered why Fatima, a wealthy woman, was living there. It was strange, considering that Fatima had always demonstrated having enough resources to live in maximum comfort anywhere else. Something was wrong, and Melissa couldn't stop thinking about it. Later, during dinner, Melissa shared her concerns with Marta. "Mom, you won't believe who's living in the nursing home now," Melissa said, playing with her food absent-mindedly. "Who?" Marta asked, curious. "Fatima, Marcelo's mother," Melissa said, a bit hesitant. Marta thought for a few moments and then smiled lightly. "Well, it seems that life comes full circle, doesn't it?" Marta said. "I think I'll make friends with her." Melissa looked at her mother, confused. "Make friends with her, Mom? She hates me, and she still thinks I cheated on Marcelo. Even after all these years." Marta smiled and waved her hand, unconcerned. "She doesn't need to know I'm your mother. I'll just talk and maybe find out what happened to her. There's something strange about all this, and I'm curious to know." Melissa stayed quiet, but she knew her mother had a point. Fatima was there for some reason, and it was strange to think that such a rich and arrogant woman would choose to live in a common nursing home. As she reflected on this, she let the idea of Marta befriending Fatima mature in her mind. Marta, as she had promised, tried several times to approach Fatima, but the task proved much more difficult than she had imagined. Fatima was a closed, rigid woman, and she rarely exchanged more than a few polite words with other residents of the nursing home. She always seemed caught up in her own thoughts, distant and, at times, even hostile. Marta realized that winning her trust would be almost impossible and eventually gave up trying to force a relationship. However, one day, while Melissa was passing by the corridor in front of Fatima's room, she noticed something different. The door was ajar, and Fatima was sitting on the bed, pale and sweating. The expression of pain on her face made Melissa stop immediately. "Fatima, what's happening?" Melissa asked, entering the room without waiting for a response. Fatima was breathing with difficulty, pressing one hand against her chest. "I'm not feeling well," Fatima said, her voice weak. Melissa acted quickly. She helped Fatima lie down on the bed, adjusting the pillows so she would be comfortable. With skilled and experienced hands, she checked Fatima's blood pressure and realized it was low. Amid the process, Melissa noticed the woman's pallor and the way her body trembled. "You have diabetes, don't you?" Melissa asked, recognizing typical signs of hypoglycemia. Fatima nodded, unable to speak. Without wasting time, Melissa took a candy from her purse and offered it to Fatima. "Eat this, it will help." Fatima hesitated for a moment but obeyed. Melissa stayed by her side, watching as color slowly returned to Fatima's face and her breathing stabilized. A few minutes later, Fatima seemed much better. "Thank you," said Fatima, with a voice surprisingly soft and sincere. The word "thank you" was something Melissa never imagined hearing from Fatima's mouth. Melissa just smiled and nodded her head, satisfied to have helped, but without making a fuss. That simple thank you signaled a change, and indeed, after that episode, the relationship between the two changed. Fatima began treating Melissa with more politeness and respect, and their conversations, previously brief and dry, became more cordial. Neither of them touched on the subject of the past, as if there was a silent agreement that it wasn't worth reliving old resentments. A few days later, Melissa was organizing resident files when Raphael arrived, accompanied by Andre. The boy, now 10 years old, ran up to his mother, hugging her tightly. "Mom!" Andre exclaimed, with his usual energy, making Melissa smile broadly. "Hi, my love," Melissa responded, bending down to squeeze her son against her chest. Meanwhile, Fatima, who was nearby, watched the scene with a distracted expression, until her eyes landed on Andre. She stopped abruptly, as if something had been triggered in her mind. Her eyes widened, and slowly, tears began to form. The resemblance was undeniable. Andre was the exact image of Marcelo when he was that age. Every feature, every movement of the boy reminded Fatima of the son she had lost. She swallowed hard, the pain of the loss coming back with full force, and without saying a word, Fatima ran to her room, tears now freely flowing down her face. Melissa, noticing her reaction, asked Raphael and Andre to wait just a minute. "I'll be right back," she said, and quickly followed Fatima. When she entered the room, she found Fatima sitting on the bed, crying softly. "Fatima," Melissa began, her voice gentle. "Is everything okay?" Fatima looked at her, tears still falling, and gestured for her to come closer. I'm sorry," Fatima started, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm sorry for everything. I was so cruel to you, and now, seeing Andre, he looks just like Marcelo. He really is my grandson, isn't he?" Melissa nodded slowly, saying nothing. I've missed 10 years of his life, Fatima continued, wiping her tears with trembling hands. All because of my pride, because of my suspicions. I was so blind. Melissa sat next to her on the bed, not sure exactly what to say. She was also shaken, although she felt nothing for Marcelo anymore, neither anger nor love. The weight of the situation was beginning to surface. I didn't know he. Melissa hesitated, choosing her words. What happened to Marcelo? Fatima took a deep breath, wiping her eyes before continuing. Marcelo was always reckless, she began, her voice weak. I never set boundaries for him, and he ended up getting lost. He spent money as if it were infinite. When I retired, he took over the company management, but he was a terrible administrator. He drove everything to bankruptcy, yet he kept trying to show off, pretending everything was fine. Fatima paused, her voice faltering as she recalled the events. One night, he left the house in the middle of the night, driving the car at high speed. Fatima's voice trembled. He lost control and crashed into a tree. Marcelo didn't survive the accident, and I was left without my son, without the money, without anything. Melissa looked at Fatima, feeling a mix of sadness and compassion. I'm sorry, Fatima, Melissa said softly, feeling the weight of the tragedy. And I realize I've lost more than I could have imagined. Andre, he's all I have left of Marcelo. Melissa, moved by Fatima's words, sat in silence for a long moment, although Marcelo's story brought back difficult memories. She understood Fatima's pain, and at that moment, she saw something more than the rigid woman she had known years ago. You can meet Andre, Fatima, Melissa said, finally. He's a wonderful boy. Fatima just nodded, still crying, as Melissa stood up to give her a moment to process everything. Melissa took Fatima to where Andre was. The boy was sitting on the couch, distracted with his toys. When he saw his mother approaching with Fatima by her side, he furrowed his brow in confusion. He knew only Marta as his grandmother, so Fatima's presence by his side was a mystery to him. Son, I want to introduce you to someone very special, Melissa said, with a soft smile. This is Fatima, she is your grandmother on your father's side. Andre blinked, still confused, and looked at Fatima and then back at his mother, trying to process the information. But what about Grandma Marta? He asked, his expression mixing curiosity and confusion. Melissa crouched down, getting eye level with him, and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Marta is your maternal grandmother, my mom, Melissa explained patiently. And Fatima is the mother of your biological father, Marcelo. Andre, who already knew that Rafael was not his biological father, looked at Fatima with new eyes and then turned to his mother, the curious expression still on his face. Where is my biological father? He asked, with the honesty typical of a child. Fatima, who had been quiet until then, took a deep breath and stepped forward. She knelt beside Andre and, with a soft voice, replied, Your father is in heaven now, Andre. He left us some time ago. Andre pondered the information, processing what that meant. He didn't seem sad but was clearly trying to understand it. After a few moments, he looked at Fatima and, with the simplicity of a child, said, I'm sorry. But you know, I have my dad, Rafael, and now I have another grandma too, right? The words from Andre hit Fat. In a way she didn't expect. The sincerity and affection in the boy's speech moved her deeply, and she couldn't hold back the tears that began to well up in her eyes. But this time, they were tears of gratitude, not pain. Yes, my dear. Now you have another grandma, Fatima replied, her voice choked, but a smile spreading across her face. Andre, satisfied with the answer, hugged Fatima, who returned the embrace with tenderness. That simple but meaningful gesture touched Melissa's heart, who watched the scene with a lump in her throat. From that day on, Andre began visiting Fatima frequently at the nursing home, bringing little news from his life and always brightening her days. Fatima, once so closed off and suspicious, now had a new reason to smile. She clung to Andre as if making up for lost years. Interestingly, the friendship that Marta had so tried to build with Fatima finally blossomed. Over time, the two became best friends, something Melissa could never have imagined in the past. The afternoons at the nursing home were lively, with Marta and Fatima chatting about life, sharing stories, and sometimes laughing as if they were old acquaintances. "You know, Fatima is a good person," Marta said one day to Melissa, while having coffee at Melissa's house. "But from the stories she's told me, I understand why she was so rigid and suspicious. She was deceived a lot when she was younger, and many people approached her because of the money. That explains a lot." Melissa nodded, remembering how Fatima was in the beginning. "Yes, that made her a suspicious person. She had to learn how to protect herself," Marta continued. "But now, with the friendship we've built and the affection she has for Andre, I see she's starting to open up more." As the relationship between everyone flourished, Raphael and Melissa bought a larger house, close to the nursing home. The idea of having Marta and Fatima closer was a comfort to both. One day, sitting in the living room of the new house, Melissa and Raphael discussed the possibility of inviting Marta and Fatima to live with them. "It would be perfect to have them here," Melissa said, smiling at the thought of the house full of life and laughter. "I agree, I think it would be great for them too," Raphael added. "I'll talk to my mom and see what she thinks." To their surprise, both Marta and Fatima declined the invitation. They were happy in the nursing home, with friends and a routine that brought them joy. Melissa respected the decision, but secretly she was glad to see how they had found a new purpose in the community. A few weeks later, Melissa organized a Sunday lunch, gathering everyone at her new home. Marta and Fatima came excited, and to make the gathering even more special, Melissa invited Lucia, her old co-worker, whom she hadn't spoken to in a while. The room was filled with laughter and conversation, with Raphael and Andre setting the table for lunch while Melissa supervised the kitchen. When everyone was seated, Melissa stood up, smiling. "Before we start, I have some news to share," she said, capturing everyone's attention. "I'm pregnant." A murmur of surprise and happiness filled the room. Marta and Fatima looked at each other, moved. "And there's more," Melissa continued, smiling even wider. "It's a girl." "A girl!" Marta exclaimed, already imagining holding a granddaughter in her arms. Fatima also smiled, wiping emotional tears from her eyes. "It's going to be amazing to have a little granddaughter," Fatima said, her voice soft and full of affection. That day was filled with joy and celebrations. Everyone gathered around Melissa, celebrating the new life that was coming and reinforcing the bonds of love and friendship that, over time, had become stronger than they could ever have imagined. What did you think of the story? Don't forget to comment, like, and share the channel. See you next time.